Today, we are cracking open a novel that, for generations, has been, well, it's been marketed as the ultimate romantic classic.
Right, a sweeping tale of transcendent passion.
Exactly. Played out across these wild, beautiful moors. But if you think you know Wuthering Heights, you might want to think again. We're diving into Emily Bronte's solitary masterpiece, and we're armed with source material that treats this supposed love story as a detailed, almost forensic, multi-generational case study in psychological abuse.
And that paradox, it's not just a nice marketing hook for our discussion. It's the fundamental truth of the novel itself. I mean, when this book was first published back in 1847, Victorian readers were so unsettled by it, not by the passion, but by the raw emotional cruelty and the moral ambiguity of it all.
They wanted it banned.
They actually demanded it be banned. Our sources suggest they weren't shocked by literary romance. They were profoundly disturbed because what they were seeing was profound emotional realism for the first time.
And that central conflict is precisely why this novel is, I think, far more relevant today than ever before. The book that millions of high schoolers read thinking it's about soulmates is, according to the psychological analysis in our deep dive, the blueprint for toxic relationships. It's like an instruction manual on how to weaponize trauma.
So we're going to frame this discussion by stating the core finding right up front. Wuthering Heights is, quite possibly, the most toxic love story ever published. It is so destructively obsessive that modern psychologists right now use the relationship between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff to analyze dangerous attachment disorders.
Things like narcissistic manipulation.
Narcissistic manipulation,
Right.
the mechanics of trauma bonding. It's a 19th century text that speaks directly to 21st century therapy sessions. It's kind of incredible.
So our mission today is to unpack Emily Bronte's only novel, to reveal how she, maybe inadvertently, predicted modern psychological truths about obsession, manipulation, and that devastating cycle of revenge. We'll show you why this novel's really complex structure and its savage emotional honesty make it a crucial text for understanding everything from modern dating dynamics to, social media feuds.
So we're treating this classic not as a romance to be celebrated, but as a detailed, forensically accurate case file on psychological destruction, and one that spans 2 full generations.
Okay, let's unpack this material and look at Wuthering Heights not as a love story, but as a slow-motion crime scene waiting to happen. So if you're wondering why a book from 1847 deserves this much attention, the shocking claim from the sources is this. This novel, which was initially dismissed as coarse and loathsome by its contemporaries somehow,
It predicted everything.
it predicted everything we now recognize about toxic relationships. It's just astonishing that such insight could come from a life lived in such isolation.
It is astonishing, because Bronte achieved this level of psychological insight while living in such a remote, confined world. I mean, think about it. She detailed specific toxic behaviors long before Sigmund Freud was even born, let alone before psychology had terms for them.
So what are we talking about specifically?
Well, the text meticulously lays out behaviors that map directly onto clinical definitions of love bombing, intense manipulation, gaslighting, emotional abuse, and the destructive cycle of revenge that just utterly consumes everyone connected to the central pair.
That systemic breakdown is the true horror, isn't it? It isn't just a sad romance that ends badly. It's a profound examination of how 2 damaged people can create an entire ecosystem of suffering around them.
Exactly. And the fact that the book still makes people uncomfortable today is, according to our sources, because it forces us to acknowledge uncomfortable truths about obsessive love. Truths we often prefer to romanticize.
Right, we gloss over with words like passion or destiny.
We do. But this book holds up an unvarnished mirror to the darkest side of human attachment, specifically attachment that's rooted in early trauma. And our sources highlighted one truly terrifying Gothic detail that, for me, just illustrates the total consumption of the main character by this obsession. When Heathcliff's body was eventually discovered, he was found deceased and smiling, found literally grinning at an open window.
A grin! That's utterly chilling.
Absolutely chilling. He was staring out toward the moors, the setting where his singular dark obsession with Catherine had completely consumed his life, and it had rendered all social reality meaningless to him. This wasn't a peaceful death.
Yeah.
It was a psychological surrender. This image, this final horrifying grin of satisfaction, was so visceral, so unsettling to the small community, that locals were quoted as saying they refused to enter the house alone afterwards.
Wow.
It's an image that captures the absolute fusion of madness and fulfillment that drove him.
So what we are really dealing with is a novel that is emotionally raw enough to terrify an entire community, and at the same time psychologically accurate enough to be studied by modern therapists. That's a powerful combination.
To appreciate the story, we have to first appreciate the environment. The book takes place in the 18th and early 19th centuries, set entirely within the wild, isolated, and utterly untamed landscape of the Yorkshire moors in northern England.
And this isn't just a pretty setting, it's crucial,
Right.
right?
It's crucial because the harsh elemental setting mirrors, anticipates, and often amplifies the emotional intensity of the story. The landscape is a character.
And within this elemental landscape, Brontë establishes two distinct estates that seem to represent these opposing societal forces.
Yes, the houses are characters in themselves. First, you have Wuthering Heights, that's the Earnshaw home. It is rough, windswept, high on the hill, subject to the intense weather.
And it represents the emotional, untamed primal life.
Exactly. Then, second, you have Thrushcross Grange, home of the Linton family. It sits lower down, it's surrounded by parks, and it represents social civility, refinement, wealth, and, well, containment. The tension between those two places drives the entire narrative.
So the story centers around two main characters. Heathcliff arrives mysteriously as a foundling. The sources describe him as a dark-skinned child of unknown origins. Mr. Earnshaw, the kind patriarch, just brings him home from a trip to Liverpool.
And the mystery of Heathcliff's background is absolutely essential to his identity. It immediately brands him as an internal, dangerous outsider in rigid Victorian England. He's neither fully English nor easily categorized socially, and he immediately forms this incredibly intense, almost ferocious bond with the young Catherine Earnshaw. It's a connection that just transcends typical childhood friendship and all the social boundaries of the time.
This immediate, intense connection is immediately challenged, isn't it?
It is. From the moment he arrives, Catherine's older brother Hindley detests Heathcliff. He sees him as an intruder, a social threat, and he treats him cruelly, humiliating him and forcing him into service.
And that's the seed, right? That early, sustained degradation of Heathcliff sets the stage for the deep-seated psychological trauma and that eventual, all-consuming desire for revenge.
Yes, that's where it all begins.
So this intense, all-consuming bond between Catherine and Heathcliff matures into an adult obsession. But then comes the fateful, triggering moment of the novel, the fatal choice.
A fatal choice.
Yeah.
Catherine, despite her famous claim that she is spiritually inseparable from Heathcliff,
Her I am Heathcliff moment.
that very one, she chooses to marry the refined, wealthy, and socially suitable neighbor, Edgar Linton. She makes a pragmatic social choice over an authentic emotional one. She even confesses that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her, which shows you that her desire for social status outweighed her desire for what she saw as her authentic self.
And that singular choice, the betrayal of her authentic self, is the trigger that unleashes the entire tragedy that follows. So Catherine makes this choice, and Heathcliff, who is just utterly humiliated and enraged, vanishes.
For 3 years, he's just gone.
And when he returns, he's no longer the degraded foundling or the rough servant. He reappears as a mysterious, wealthy gentleman, possessing unexplained riches and a new, chilling veneer of refinement.
Our sources are unequivocal on this. This transformation, this sudden acquisition of wealth and polish, purely for the purpose of reappearing to inflict pain. It's the ultimate narcissistic revenge fantasy.
It's not about moving on.
No. It sets in motion a systematic, calculated campaign of destruction that is breathtaking in its cold-blooded strategic planning. This is not emotional volatility. This is long-term focused ruin.
Let's get into the mechanics of that destruction. Because he doesn't just settle for one act of revenge, he ruins everyone connected to Catherine in what is essentially a generational plot.
Exactly. The revenge is methodical. First, he targets Catherine's brother, Hindley Earnshaw,
Who was his original tormentor?
his original tormentor. Heathcliff uses his new wealth and charm to appeal to Hindley's existing weaknesses, gambling and drinking. He doesn't physically harm Hindley. He systematically encourages Hindley's ruin. He offers him crippling loans secured against Wuthering Heights itself, until Hindley ruins himself financially and psychologically, essentially handing over ownership of the house to Heathcliff through debt.
So he uses capitalism as a weapon of emotional destruction.
Precisely. Financial manipulation is a key tool. Secondly, he targets the Linton family, specifically Edgar's sister Isabella. He seduces and manipulates the sensitive Isabella Linton into a miserable and unhappy marriage.
Why? What's the goal there?
Purely to gain a foothold in the Grange family structure and to inflict continuous emotional pain on Edgar. He subjects Isabella to relentless psychological cruelty until she flees, completely broken.
And the cruelty doesn't stop with the generation that wronged him. This is where the story becomes a true generational trauma narrative, isn't it?
It really is. The source material stresses that Heathcliff corrupts and controls the next generation. He ensures that Hareton, Hindley's son, is deliberately kept ignorant, degraded, and emotionally abused, a direct mirror of his own degraded youth.
He's recreating his own trauma in someone else.
He is. And he financially manipulates young Catherine Linton and Hareton to solidify his control over both estates. This sustained behavior, emotional abuse, isolation, and financial leverage is textbook psychological control. His goal is clearly focused on reversing the power dynamics, ensuring that those who once degraded him now feel his degradation multiplied across their children.
It sounds utterly bleak, but the novel does offer one small note of redemption at the end, suggesting that maybe the cycle is not inevitable.
It does, but only after decades of suffering. The story concludes with the eventual romantic union of the younger generation, Catherine Earnshaw and young Catherine Linton. The sources interpret this as suggesting that toxic patterns can be broken, but only after the suffering of those who came before has run its full course. Their healthier, gentler love story is the small, fragile bud of hope growing out of the scorched earth left by their parents.
It is nearly impossible to separate this book from its author. Emily Jane Brontë remains the most mysterious of the famous literary sisters. To understand how she wrote such a savage, insightful book, we have to look at her extraordinary isolation.
She was a true enigma. Our sources emphasize that she lived almost all of her tragically short 30 years in near-complete isolation at the Haworth parsonage. While her sisters, Charlotte and Anne, ventured out occasionally for careers as governesses or short stints at school, Emily was fiercely rooted to that specific remote place. She was socially awkward, intensely shy.
And happiest when entirely alone. Let's focus on the setting of that parsonage. It wasn't just a house. It seems to have been an oppressive, elemental force in their lives.
It was central to her entire world. The sources describe the parsonage as a remote stone house perched on the edge of the moors, constantly battered by wind. The sound of the wind howling and rattling the windows was a permanent soundtrack to their lives.
That sounds like the title of the book right there.
It basically is. And even more oppressively, the house stood right next to the village graveyard. The sources note that the family had a daily, inescapable view of death, constantly walking past the tombstones. It was a place where life was intense, short, and bordered by the wilderness and the grave.
And yet, this profound isolation didn't shrink her inner world. It seems to have amplified it.
That's the key. Emily rarely left home, but she found solace in deep absorption in the wild landscape surrounding her. She would walk for hours, often alone, through all weather, across those heather-covered hills. The forces stressed that this specific wild landscape would later pulse through every page of her novel, making the moors the symbolic geography of the human heart, untamed and fierce.
We also know that her family trauma provided direct, intimate material for her fictional characters. The tragedy of her brother, Branwell, seems inextricably linked to Heathcliff.
Branwell's story is heartbreaking and absolutely critical to Wuthering Heights. He was a talented artist whose life was ruined by his descent into crippling alcoholism and opium addiction. This gave Emily intimate knowledge of how obsession destroys people from within. She witnessed firsthand the cycle of self-destruction, the volatility, the debt, the emotional wreckage that addiction leaves behind.
And she poured that directly into the book.
Directly. It's this firsthand knowledge of emotional collapse and financial irresponsibility that she poured directly into both Heathcliff's malevolent manipulation and Hindley's total ruin.
It's often said that a writer should write what they know. Emily Brontë knew isolation, addiction, and death.
And she also knew the constraints placed upon women. She published Wuthering Heights under the masculine pseudonym Ellis Bell. She was keenly aware that Victorian society demanded strict moral instruction and sentimentalism from its literature, and it certainly wouldn't tolerate such raw, untamed, emotionally honest, and morally ambiguous work coming from a female author.
And the tragic final note to all of this was her first and only published work.
Yes. She died of tuberculosis 1 year later at the age of 30. She never lived to see the backlash subside, nor did she know the enduring cultural impact of the single novel she managed to complete. She poured everything she had into this one work and was gone before it found its true audience.
Which is an incredible tragedy in itself.
To fully grasp that initial hostile reaction to the novel, we have to place it within the demanding and restrictive framework of Victorian morality. Wuthering Heights was truly groundbreaking and therefore intensely controversial because it fundamentally violated the established norms of 19th century English literature.
Okay, so what were those norms? What were Victorian readers expecting from a novel, and how did Brontë so completely fail them?
Well, Victorian expectations were clear. Literature had to be socially and morally didactic. Novels were expected to provide clear moral instruction, featuring clear heroes and villains,
Good guys and bad guys.
good guys and bad guys, and absolutely insisting on the clear, visible punishment for wickedness and the reward for virtue. The reading public was seeking reinforcement of social order.
And Wuthering Heights offered a deliberate moral challenge instead.
Exactly. It provided what they saw as a moral vacuum. There was no reward for virtue. Edgar Linton, the refined gentleman, is consistently made to suffer, and the wicked Heathcliff not only gets away with everything but dies, in his own twisted way, happy and fulfilled by his obsession.
The bad guy wins.
In a sense, yes. This deliberate ambiguity led critics to condemn its coarseness and discordant characters. They couldn't categorize a story that refused to tell them who to root for, or crucially, how to maintain social propriety.
Beyond the morality, the book also struck deep into Victorian anxieties about class and social status, particularly around Heathcliff's origins.
Oh, absolutely. His ambiguous background, a dark-skinned foundling brought from Liverpool, made him the ultimate social wild card. Victorian society was obsessed with hierarchy and parentage. His eventual transformation from degraded servant to wealthy master demonstrates a profound societal observation Brontë made: how easily wealth could rapidly transform social status in an industrializing world.
But there's a catch, isn't there?
A huge one. Brontë uses him to show that wealth could never truly heal the deep early wounds of humiliation and degradation he suffered. The scars of his youth, the feeling of being an outsider, remained, fueling every subsequent destructive action.
That distinction is key. Wealth bought him power, but it never bought him belonging.
Precisely. And if we look at Catherine's dilemma, it perfectly encapsulates the impossible situation for women in that era, a situation that still resonates today.
Catherine's choice to marry Edgar instead of Heathcliff is often interpreted romantically, but socially it was a harsh reality.
It was a necessity of her time. Her choice highlights the extreme social pressures faced by women who had little economic power outside of marriage. Her realization that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her financially and socially demonstrates the struggle between authentic, primal desire and the necessity of maintaining a carefully curated social persona. It's a choice between social survival and emotional truth.
And the novel forces modern listeners to ask, how much of our authentic self do we sacrifice for what others deem acceptable or for social climbing?
It's a very high-stakes version of choosing the safe, sensible partner over the volatile, intense one.
But with fatal consequences.
Yes, with fatal consequences. Brontë suggests that denying that fundamental part of yourself, that untamed nature symbolized by Heathcliff, is a form of self-annihilation, leading directly to her spiritual torment and early demise.
Okay, now we move to the core psychological ideas that elevate this novel beyond melodrama. The central theme, according to our sources, is not love, but the fundamental nature of obsession and what we would now call trauma-bonding.
The relationship between Catherine and Heathcliff isn't based on mutual respect or growth. It's based on mutual trauma and psychological fusion. That most famous line of the book,
I am Heathcliff.
Catherine's declaration, I am Heathcliff. It's often quoted romantically, but psychologically it's a terrifying statement of absolute codependence. It's a recognition that their identities are so merged that boundaries have completely dissolved.
Why is that fusion so dangerous, and how does it differ from, say, healthy interdependence?
Well, healthy love involves two whole, independent people supporting each other while maintaining their individual identities. Psychological fusion, as we see in Wuthering Heights, means that one person cannot survive without the other because they believe their very existence depends on the other. When Catherine marries Edgar, she essentially splits her own identity. This attachment isn't just a strong bond. The sources define it as a destructive consumption. It's an engine of emotional chaos that forces every other character into its orbit.
And the second massive theme is revenge, which Heathcliff utilizes not merely as payback, but as a strategic tool for reversing power dynamics and inflicting maximal degradation.
That distinction is so crucial. Heathcliff's revenge campaign is wholly focused on reversing the power dynamics of his childhood. He suffered degradation and humiliation at the hands of Hindley and the Lintons' implicit social snobbery. So his only focus as an adult is making others feel exactly as powerless, degraded, and humiliated as he once felt.
Every move is a mirror.
Every strategic marriage, every financial maneuver is designed to be a mirror of his own suffering.
And this need to reverse power dynamics and inflict shame is disturbingly modern.
Our sources drew a direct, unsettling line here, observing that this precise psychology This meticulous public need to leverage status to inflict maximal shame on a perceived offender is the very driving force behind modern phenomena like cancel culture and online revenge campaigns.
Wow.
It's about leveraging status, wealth, or attention to inflict a wound that is permanent and public. The emotional motive is ancient, but Bronte's description of the strategic execution is shockingly contemporary.
We also need to discuss the cost of denying authenticity, which is a price paid entirely by Catherine.
Catherine's spiritual torment and her eventual early self-imposed demise represent the ultimate cost of denying one's authentic, primal self for the sake of social approval. She attempts to separate her true identity, which is Heathcliff, from her social identity, Mrs. Linton, but her body and mind reject that schism. She cannot survive having compromised her fundamental nature. The novel serves as a profound warning against living a bifurcated life.
Finally, we must revisit the moorlands as essential, powerful symbolism, not just as scenery.
They are the defining choice of the novel. The moors represent the choice between wild, authentic freedom, the unconstrained, elemental passion shared by Catherine and Heathcliff, and the suffocating constraints of social life.
And the houses reinforce this?
The houses reinforce this symbolism. Wuthering Heights, exposed and battered, represents that fierce, wild authenticity and emotional transparency, however savage it might be. Thrushcross Grange, contained and manicured, represents social control, superficial refinement, and emotional repression. The entire story is a constant visual and emotional battle between nature and culture, chaos and order.
The staying power of Wuthering Heights really rests on the magnetic, if horrifying, presence of its protagonists. Heathcliff is perhaps the prototype for the modern anti-hero of toxic masculinity.
He is a total rejection of the traditional romantic hero archetype. He's neither noble, generous, nor remotely likable. He is driven by malice, possessiveness, and cruelty. His journey from abused foundling to vengeful, wealthy master is a devastating case study in how sustained childhood trauma can completely and irrevocably corrupt someone's soul, twisting loyalty into obsession and devotion into control.
Yet, despite all the calculated cruelty, the manipulation, the abuse, the long-term destruction, readers are simultaneously repelled and fascinated by him. Why does Brontë manage this paradox? How does she pull that off?
That paradox is Bronte's genius. Our sources explain that his intense, singular devotion to Catherine, however twisted and destructive its manifestation, possesses a strange, elemental, non-negotiable purity. It contrasts so sharply with the calculated social decisions of everyone else in the book. He is authentic in his suffering and his madness. That intensity, the sheer power of his feeling, is what draws readers in, even as his malicious actions repel them.
Moving on to Catherine Earnshaw. She is the true tragic figure, isn't she? Irrevocably caught between two completely incompatible worlds, essentially committing identity suicide.
Her internal torment is immense and I think very relatable. She understands the gravity of her social position. Her declaration that marrying Heathcliff would degrade her shows her awareness of the external constraints of class and gender. Her tragedy reveals what the sources call an impossible position women still face today, caught between the demands of their genuine, complex hearts and the pressure to maintain a desirable, curated public image. Her fate is a commentary on societal limitation, not just personal romantic weakness.
We should also touch on the function of the secondary characters, like the sensitive Edgar Linton, the abused Isabella, and even Hindley. They aren't just props, they are essential for understanding the complexity of the dynamic.
They serve as crucial moral and emotional foils. Edgar represents societal, virtue-polite, refined, wealthy, but he is ultimately too passive and too contained to deal with the savage intensity of Catherine's nature.
He's just out of his depth.
Completely. Isabella is a pawn, used by Heathcliff solely to wound Edgar. These characters highlight that while Catherine and Heathcliff's relationship is toxic, the world they inhabit, represented by Thrushcross Grange, is often too cold, too repressed, and too socially calculated to provide genuine fulfillment. Brontë resists easy answers.
So ultimately, the enduring power of the novel lies in this moral complexity.
Absolutely. Emily Brontë refused to resolve the fundamental contradictions in human nature. Catherine and Heathcliff are complex, flawed individuals whose terrible, self-serving choices create unimaginable suffering. But in doing so, they reveal profound, unvarnished truths about loyalty, love, betrayal, and the brutal reality of the human condition. They are victims of trauma, but also highly effective agents of their own and others' destruction.
Now, for listeners who love the craft of writing, Wuthering Heights is a structurally revolutionary text. Emily Brontë didn't just tell a story linearly. She employed a complex, layered storytelling technique that utilizes multiple, inherently unreliable narrators.
And this was structurally advanced by decades. It's incredibly modern.
This structure can be confusing even for advanced readers, but it's essential to the novel's psychological power. Can you walk us through the layers?
Sure. It begins with the primary narrator, Mr. Lockwood. He is a London gentleman, a complete outsider, renting Thrushcross Grange. He's fascinated and a bit repulsed by his strange, intense neighbors at the Heights, but he's fundamentally ignorant of their history.
So he's our entry point, but he doesn't know anything.
Exactly. He is recording the events as he experiences them, filtered through his own judgmental, limited Victorian sensibilities.
And the actual family history, the core of the narrative, is related by the housekeeper, Nellie Dean.
Nellie Dean is the main storyteller, relating the entire strolling history of Catherine and Heathcliff to Lockwood during long, intense winter evenings. She witnessed everything firsthand, often playing an active role in events. But here's the crucial point. The use of two layers Lockwood reporting what Nellie told him creates an immediate distance from objective truth.
This layering seems intentionally designed to make the reader uneasy about reality, forcing them to become skeptical detectives.
That is the function. The sources highlight that this layered, fragmented storytelling forces readers to constantly question what they're hearing, creating an almost dreamlike quality where truth becomes slippery. You never fully trust anyone's version of events.
It sounds a bit like being gaslit by the novel itself.
It's a fantastic way to put it. This structural technique perfectly mirrors the emotional experience of being inside a toxic or abusive relationship where reality is constantly being warped, manipulated, or gaslighted.
Let's elaborate on the specific biases of the two main narrators. Lockwood and Nellie are flawed in different ways.
Well, Lockwood is blinded by his social refinement. His Victorian perspective prevents him from truly grasping the emotional savagery and depth of feeling at the Heights. He misinterprets signs of profound suffering as mere oddity or bad manners.
And Nellie, she seems more grounded, but is she reliable?
Not entirely. She's blinded by her practicality and ingrained social hierarchy. She often imposes her own moral judgments, selectively revealing or omitting details, always positioning herself as the voice of common sense and virtue.
So the reader is forced to piece together the truth by filtering the events through two distinct, fundamentally flawed lenses.
Exactly. And this uncertainty about where the truth truly lies is what gives the novel its unique, unsettling power. It allows the supernatural elements, which Nellie often dismisses, to exist in the periphery.
Let's discuss the ghost elements. They aren't just Gothic flair, they serve a distinct psychological purpose, don't they?
They are powerful because they emerge directly from psychological reality. When Heathcliff speaks to Catherine's grave, or claims to sense her presence, or when Lockwood is tormented by her ghost early in the book, readers accept these moments not because they believe in ghosts,
but because we believe in his obsession.
Precisely. Heathcliff's obsession has been so profoundly and utterly established. The ghost is a manifestation of psychological reality, the burden of guilt, regret, and consuming obsession, rather than just a spooky prop. Brontë knew that we are often haunted or consumed by our inner demons or the emotional legacy of broken connections.
So let's recalibrate the initial reaction, because it was far from the praise the book receives today. Victorian critics were hostile, confused, and often disgusted by Wuthering Heights.
They were. Critics called it a strange, inartistic story, condemned its psychological honesty, and found the characters too discordant, coarse, frankly, too evil for literature. As we discussed, the moral ambiguity was the most threatening aspect. The lack of clear moral instruction violated the entire contract of Victorian literature, which was meant to uplift and instruct.
It was a moral panic disguised as a literary critique.
Precisely, they couldn't stand the lack of justice. Yet, somewhere between 1847 and today, the novel transformed from a scandalous oddity into an absolute essential classic studied worldwide. What caused that monumental shift in perception?
I think society caught up to Emily Brontë.
That's the simplest way to put it. The novel's enduring popularity across cultures demonstrates that it tapped into a fundamental, undeniable truth about human nature. As society grew more comfortable with psychological realism and ambiguity in the 20th century, the novel's uncompromising complexity stopped being viewed as a flaw and became recognized as its greatest virtue.
People realized the emotional brutality was the whole point.
They did.
And in terms of her legacy, Brontë was essentially a literary prophet of the modern psychological novel.
Absolutely. Our sources emphasize that Brontë anticipated psychological realism by decades. She explored with profound intuition gained from her own domestic observation exactly how sustained childhood trauma shapes adult behavior and drives destructive cyclical patterns. These were ideas that would not be fully documented or understood until clinical psychology developed much later. She laid the essential groundwork for 20th century narratives that focus intensely on internal damage and emotional causality.
The novel's impact extends far beyond literature, too. Its complex structure, use of unreliable narrators, and intense focus on emotional pathology influenced countless writers who followed, solidifying its literary legacy and changing the way stories were told.
And that's just literature.
Right. And why does the core story, the Catherine and Heathcliff dynamic, continue to be adapted across every medium generation after generation? We have movies, TV shows, and even Kate Bush's famous song, Wuthering Heights.
Because it speaks to a universal agonizing tension. The core narrative of the Catherine Heathcliff Impossible Love resonates because it is fundamentally about the agonizing tension between intense primal desire and the need for social acceptability, for safety, for status. It captures that painful choice we all face between what we deeply authentically want and what society tells us we should accept, or what is pragmatic.
It seems like the themes are arguably more relevant now than they were even 20 years ago, specifically because of social media dynamics.
Most definitely. The novel's meticulous exploration of social climbing, how wealth dictates status, and the use of strategic long-game revenge translates shockingly well into modern social media culture. Heathcliff's meticulous strategic destruction of his opponents mirrors the public, performative, and generational nature of today's online conflicts, where the goal is often not just to win, but to utterly degrade and ruin the opponent's social standing.
It is truly staggering to realize that a woman living in near-complete isolation in a remote stone house in 1847 created a story that captures the central anxieties of the 21st century.
It proves that isolation need not limit imagination. From her remote parsonage, Emily Brontë crafted a narrative whose psychological complexity rivals any contemporary work, and a relationship dynamic that continues to be the ultimate cautionary tale in modern dating discussions more than 175 years later. It's a tragedy that speaks to every generation.
For me, having done this deep dive, what struck me most profoundly is the sheer force of the author's isolation and intuition. Emily Brontë achieved this incredible level of psychological depth and universal truth. The ability to map the trauma cycle while living in such profound geographical isolation.
It's remarkable.
It proves definitively that geographical or social limitation does not limit imagination or insight into the complexity of the human heart. Her canvas was just smaller.
And if we look at the structure of the story, the most profound insight for me is Emily Bronte's technique of spanning 2 full generations in the narrative. This structural choice shows precisely how destructive, toxic patterns repeat and cascade through family lines, the sins of the parents visited upon the children, until, crucially, someone consciously breaks the cycle.
The next generation.
The next generation's eventual, healthier love story highlights the hope that breaking the pattern is possible, even if it requires the total emotional devastation of the generation that came before. It's a harsh, but ultimately hopeful view of generational healing.
So, if you, the listener, decide to revisit Wuthering Heights after this discussion, what is the key shift in perspective you should adopt? How do we read it now, knowing it's a crime scene and not a romance?
I'd say focus intently not on the intensity of the passion, but on the meticulous reversal of power dynamics. Look at how every character's choice is dictated by social status and wealth. Watch how Heathcliff leverages financial and emotional manipulation to control and degrade others. He weaponizes money and debt as effectively as he weaponizes scorn. Read it as a power analysis, a study in control and trauma response, not as a love story.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me. Emily Brontë died at the age of 30, never knowing she had written the literary blueprint for virtually every toxic relationship, every narcissistic revenge fantasy, and every study of trauma bonding that followed in literature, film, and psychology.
So the next time someone tells you they can't live without you, or frames their devotion in purely obsessive, all-consuming terms, or claims you are their other half, remember Heathcliff and Catherine. Remember the ultimate cost of psychological fusion, and ask yourself a difficult, provocative question. Is this truly love, or is this madness dressed up in the language of destiny?
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into literature's most disturbing and psychologically complex love story. We hope you view the wild Yorkshire moors and the definition of soulmates a little differently now.